Hey guys, this G80 came in today for a twin turbo kit, full frame. We're gonna start working on it and we're gonna do a video on the installation of the turbo kit, removal of stock turbos. Pretty basic procedure on the stock turbo removal, as that's pretty standard. But we're gonna go in depth on the installation of the turbos, so that way we can get a guide for you guys who are installing the turbo kits, and this should explain a lot better. So this is gonna be basically the S58 full frame twins contents. So I'm gonna go over the parts of the kit to make sure we have everything we need to install the kit. So we have the front turbo, which has this 45 elbow, and the rear turbo with the S-shaped outlet. And then we have front turbo manifold, rear turbo manifold, each with the nuts in place. We have the rear front turbo downpipe adapter and the rear turbo downpipe adapter, and its corresponding bolts and studs, and that's for the exhaust side. So now we're gonna go over the charge piping. So this is the pipe that goes out the rear turbo. This will go into this 90, which then will go to this adapter, and then we have the front turbo, which is this 90, that goes directly to the intercooler adapter, or not intercooler but the white pipe adapter. We have the 4 hose clamps for the 290 hoses. That's it for the charge piping. And then we have coolant fittings for the both turbos. So we have for the rear turbo, we have 2 banjos, M14 banjos, 2 banjo bolts, and then 4 crush washers. For the front turbo, I'm actually gonna update this, but this is a M14 to -6 adapter, and then it's gonna have another banjo and another banjo bolt, M14, and that's gonna be 3 crush washers for this one. We have a coolant return kit, which is actually, this is the coolant feed kit, which goes to the hose mender that will go to the factory hose that goes to a T. This fits the front turbo and this other line fits the rear turbo. And then we have a return hose. This returns back into the engine, factory hose T, and one goes to the rear turbo. This one goes to the front turbo and this one goes to the rear turbo. We have the rear oil drain, the drain itself, 2 bolts, the gasket, 2 hose clamps, and the hose itself. You will reuse the factory adapter for the oil drain. And then we have the feeds, all feeds. So we have a 24-inch hose and a 36-inch hose. The 36-inch will go to the rear turbo and the 24-inch to the front turbo. It has an adapter to go to the engine block. The front turbo side has a banjo, M12 banjo bolt, and 2 crush washers. Rear turbo has a 45 swivel on the line, and then an adapter M12 to -4 and a crush washer. Now for the rear turbo oil drain, we have the adapter to the turbo gasket, the 2 bolts, and then we have this 90-degree hose that will go into the turbo and then into this hose mender that will go into the factory hose on the block side, and this hose clamp that will clamp the factory hose into the mender. That's basically the whole kit. And then we have gaskets for the downpipe adapters and the turbo flange. So this is basically the whole kit. And then we have the 2 filters that go on the turbos. Let me show you real quick. They are in the end. Okay, so we're gonna proceed to install the turbos into the manifolds. So we're gonna take the nuts out of the studs, which come pre-installed in some kits, not all. On some kits, we can get a bag with the nuts inside. So basically, the front turbo, we have the manifold this way. So this manifold will go like this in the engine block on the head. So we'll put it right here like this, and the turbo faces this way. So there's actually two studs that are bigger. So we can see there's two on the turbo that are easy to access. Those go on the big studs, which will be the guide on the clogging of the turbo. So we will proceed to install the two M10 nuts into the studs. And then there's a small nut that will go in this stud right here. It's very important. You might have to lift the turbo a little bit to get access to it. Put the small nut in place. Kinda turn it so it threads a little bit. Perfect. Now for the other one, it's a 13 mil. And then we'll just put it in here. So for this one, I like to put the small nut first. So I usually go like this. Kind of turn it so it threads a little bit. Perfect. Then I go to the 13 mil one on this side. Perfect. And then we go to the two 14 mil. Now, it's pretty important that you note, once you have the turbos assembled into the manifolds, you have to install the adapters to the downpipe too. So you have the two adapters. The front turbo one will be this one that doesn't have much of an angle on it, and the rear turbo one will be this one that has a bigger angle to face down. So you have to pre-install these two adapters before doing the clogging on the turbos, which is the next step. Okay, so we are losing the compressor housing bolts, just so you can clog the compressor housing.
Si está montado también te lo puedo usar.
Ah, está bien. So this way, we can now just clog the housing. Okay, so what we have now is we bolted the front turbo with the compressor housing loose to the engine. Now we're gonna put the hose that goes into the intercooler, the Wi-Fi, in, and that will give us the alignment of the compressor housing. So it's loose right now. So what I will do is I'll just take the hose, put it in the turbo, then I'll put it to the Wi-Fi. I can see it is not reaching, so I'll just take the compressor housing, move it a little bit more, and now it clips in and it's in place. So now I'll take the wrench, I'll tighten the bolts on the top. and that'll give us the clocking on the front turbo. Okay, so what we will do with the rear turbo now is we will take the compressor housing fully off. So you will remove the brackets. So there's 6 bolts. And we will have the front turbo to put in the engine. Okay, so now to put in the rear turbo, note the front turbo is loose, so we can angle back, and the engine's lifted around 2 inches from where it's sitting. So we remove the bolt on the engine mount and lifted the engine, and now we will put the rear turbo without the compressor housing in. So now you gotta tighten the rear manifold to the cylinder head. You just use 2 nuts because you don't need to fully tighten it. And do the same for the front turbo, because the front turbo will give you the alignment of the rear turbo compressor housing. So be sure to tighten the front turbo before you tighten the rear turbo compressor housing. So now we put the O-ring back in the turbo, and we're gonna put the compressor housing on. Just present it on place, and it will just put it in. And we'll put the bracket back in.
Ya ahí eso no influye nada para los filtros adelante.
Okay, so now the engine is back in place. So the compressor housing is now in place but loose, and we'll just turn it. So there's enough space in between the chassis, so right here, and the adapter for the downpipe on the front turbo. So now we will just tighten the bolts on the top, and we'll make a mark on the turbo to make sure it doesn't move. So now that both turbos are tightened, we'll just take the rear turbo out and the front turbo, and we'll do the Wastegate calibration, same steps. I just loosen the front turbo so it can angle back, and we're gonna lift the engine again to take the rear turbo out. So now we're just putting back in the brackets with the housing in place where it's supposed to sit. We'll just tighten them all back, so that way we have the turbo assembled. Okay, so for the Wastegate installation into the new turbos, the first step you're gonna do is you're gonna take the factory turbos, and you'll take an adjustable wrench onto the flapper of the Wastegate. You'll close it all the way in that it goes fully closed, and then you're just gonna take this, for example, with a wrench and push it in as much as you can. So now that it's closed, we'll just take a caliper, measure this length from the plastic part into the tip of the rod. Now once that is measured, that's gonna give you the fully closed measurement, or the fully closed stop of the Wastegate. So that way you can transfer the same measurement to new turbos.
No.
So we have our serial caliper, and then we'll just measure from the plastic part as straight as you can to the tip. So that is 25.8 in my case. Set the rod. Well, if you remove it carefully, you remove these two nuts, and you take the wastegate off carefully, you shouldn't have, the rod shouldn't have moved. And when you reinstall it here, you will remeasure, make sure it's at 26, yeah, 26, and you will take the first nut, you will back it out as much as needed. Well, you have to install it's already pre-installed, the linkage will be pre-installed in turbo, and you will make sure it's closed. Now you will take the first nut and you will turn it until you feel some pressure applying into it, and you don't want to apply a lot of pressure with the wrench because that'll take the rod out of the wastegate, so that'll change the measurement you just did. So you will take it by hand and you will just turn it until you feel there's already force on it, and then you will want to make sure this is aligned in a way that it doesn't go like sided from one side, so it's gonna be like in the middle. And you will take it the other wrench and you will tighten the nuts. Now you take both wrenches and you tighten them together good enough. It's gonna be a lot of force. And now you will see this didn't move, it's still centered. It's got a little play on it, but it's gonna be centered. And now the wastegate should be set correctly. You shouldn't have any issues. Okay, so now we're testing the wastegate calibration, and we're gonna go ahead and do a sweep. So diagnostic mode on. You see both wastegates are actuating properly. So now we're good to do this a couple times and put the turbos in place. So the front turbo assembly, to put it in the car, you already have the wastegate calibrated. You put the coolant return line, the block side facing down banjo to the straight, oil drain fitting, and then you have the adapter, so M14 to -6 AM, downpipe adapter, everything bolted to the manifold, and it's ready to go in the car. Okay, so it's important to note, before you put the turbos in, it's way easier to put the fittings for the engine block oil feed. So the rear oil feed and the longer hose with this 90 end on this side goes to the front, so it aligns to go around here. And then the front turbo oil feed has this adapter, and then the 90-degree facing down into this side that goes to the banjo. So pre-install these two fittings and the two hoses before putting the turbos in. So now we have the turbo, front turbo. We put everything in it. So we put the coolant feed adapter to this side. The coolant banjo, it's facing down on the block side of the turbo. Oil feed banjo, and then the oil drain is already in place. What it is I place the turbo in the engine block. I measure the hose, so I trimmed it to spec, and it should be good now. So for the front turbo oil drain, you have to do this before you put the rear turbo in. So when you're actually taking the clocking measurement, you want to take this hose, the oil drain hose, clamp it on the turbo flange, and then you're gonna measure it to the fitting. This is the factory fitting. You just took out the factory turbo oil drain, the one that goes into the block, and measure it. So as it comes from the factory, the clocking may change also the oil drain positioning, so it might have a little bit more slack on the hose. So you can see right now, the oil drain is going down, goes up, and then goes down again. That will create a bad oil drain on the turbo and can create smoking issues. So what you want to do is you want to take the hose and trim it as short as possible. It can actually kink a little bit in here and in here a little bit too, but it's just gonna be better than actually having it reverse back into the turbo. So I just kind of measured it right here. I'll cut the hose, I'll put it in, and as you can see now, I'll just put the clamp on the block side, and I'll take a crimper and I'll crimp the hose clamp. You can see it now only goes down, so that way you have a perfect oil drain setup. So now for the front turbo, you're gonna put the front turbo in just with one of the nuts in place, so you can actually clock it, because the rear turbo has to come in with the turbo. The front turbo needs this space to get into the rear turbo. So now that we're gonna lift the engine to get the rear turbo in, I took the bolt out the engine mount so I can lift it up, and that way we can fit the rear turbo. Now when you put in the rear turbo, you want to make sure you have all the fittings installed. So you have the two banjo fittings facing up, the oil feed fitting, and then you also have the oil drain fitting into the turbo. So the hose for the oil drain, you should also clamp it beforehand to the fitting. So when you clog the turbos, you can also kind of fit the oil drain. So as you see in the video later on, it has the fitting, the factory fitting that goes here. So you can just measure it and see where it's gonna clamp at, and you just mark it and clamp it there. And that way it's easier for you to put the oil drain later on. But when you put the turbo in, you have the all fittings, and you have to put this hose in, which is a 45 degree. You have to clamp it facing up and facing the front. You have to tighten it. So this is already pre-clamped, so you don't have to worry about this one. So you just have to tighten this fitting to make sure you are able to put the turbo in. And because when the turbo is in the car, you don't have access to tighten this fitting. So you have to make sure it's already tight and perfect. This one you do have access, and you don't put it yet because you need to access the stud in here. So you just get it with an extension right here, and once that is tightened, you can put this hose right in. Now the rear turbo, you gotta be careful, because from the angle you gotta put it in, it's gonna be super tricky. You gotta play with it around a bit, move it forward and backward, or angle it more, angle it back, until the dowel in the rear of the engine aligns with the manifold. So that way it sits perfectly onto the head, and that way you don't have a leak. Because if you leave the manifold to be sitting on the dowel, it's gonna tighten up, but there's gonna be a huge gap in between the gasket and the manifold itself. So it's gonna create a leak. So what you wanna do is you're gonna play with it around. You wanna feel it. You will feel the manifold sit perfectly. You can hear it. So that's what you wanna do before you tighten it in place. So now we just put in the rear turbo fully tight, and then the front turbo we're tightening it right now. So it's just gonna be, the turbos are gonna be in place now with the Wastegates calibrated as shown before, and we should be good to go now. So we have the coolant line. So this is a 45 of the turbo feed, goes to the T. The T goes then to the turbo, front turbo feed, which is this straight AN to 90 AN. Then we have this straight AN to hose mender, which will go to the fitting that goes in here. And then the return lines, we have this one right here, which is the rear turbo, which is a banjo facing up to a straight 6 AN, to another straight 6 AN, which goes to this T, which goes to the line on the return side of the banjo facing down, and then to this 90 and this mender that will go to the factory fitting on this water faucet. So on this step of the install process, we've done front turbo is already fully bolted in place. We put the charge hose, the 90-degree hose that goes into the bottom of the Y pipe. So for that one, I took the wastegate off the bracket so it's loose, so I could get better access to the hose clamp. And for that one, what I do is I always place the hose first into the turbo, kind of bend it this way, wiggle it into the Y pipe and push it in. Once it's pushed in, you will tighten the hose clamp. If you tighten the hose clamp first, it won't allow you to put the clip in place. Then what I did is I installed the coolant, the oil lines, oil feed, and the oil drain. And you have to put this coolant lines pre-installed into the turbo before putting it in. Perfect. And now, rear turbo, both coolant lines are, this line is pre-installed before you put the turbo in. This one you can leave it out, so you can tighten the bolts in the manifold first. You tighten this afterwards, and then you tighten the oil line, which was pre-installed into the engine block before the turbos. And now I'm gonna put the oil drain. I'll show you from the bottom how it is set up. But for now, well, let's focus on the charge pipe. So what I did, I'm gonna pin this. It's already pinned into the Y pipe. Make sure it doesn't come out. Now I will take this. So what I do, that's why I also need this to the actually the other hose clamp. I'll take this out, 1 bolt, 2 bolts, and you can move it up so you have access to the hose clamp in here. So what I ended up doing to the charge pipe is I pre-installed the 90-degree hose onto the charge pipe. So it's not tightened. This hose that goes to the turbo is tightened, and then the hose clamp for this, it's already in there. So we'll just put it in. So this thing slides in like this through the front turbo, goes in, and then you just push it in here. Don't tighten it yet, as we will be doing this after we put the pipe into the turbo. So now we have the charge pipe pretty much tightened up on the bottom. So this is the one of the rear turbo. We tightened these 2 hose clamps, and I haven't tightened the one to the 90-degree hose. So we should be able to tighten that one, and we should be finished with the charge pipe. Now the rear oil drain, you see how I cut the factory hose and I put the hose mender on it, and I finished the rear oil drain. So now the charge piping is done. I tightened this hose clamp, tightened this one, the 2 on the turbo, and then the one for the turbo and the one for the intercooler coupler. They're all tight. We should tighten the wastegate again. The adjustment are going to change as you already tightened the nuts on the linkage. And we're gonna do the coolant lines now. So make sure these 2 are tightened. The one that, well, that one you can tighten from here, but you should have tightened it from before installing the turbo, so that should be good. And then we're gonna go with this one and the rest of the lines. Now for the coolant lines, we're gonna be using this fitting right here on the hose, as well as this one. So we're gonna take out these hose clamps, the factory hose clamps. We're gonna pretty much break them, and we're gonna be able to reuse the hose, and that's gonna connect to the hose menders. I'll show you now. So we have these 2, and now we'll bring them to the new lines to clamp them in. Okay, so these are the 2 fittings you take from the stock turbo lines. There's one that's smaller. This one goes to the block, and this one goes to the water pump. So we're gonna pre-install the hose clamps in it. So we're gonna do first the water pump one, which is the bigger one. Put the hose clamp in, and then we'll take this shorty line with the mender on it, and we're gonna slide it in. It's gonna take some force, but once it's slid in, it's gonna be super easy to do. So now we're gonna think this goes this way on the water pump. So this will just clock this way, so it goes like this. Perfect. And we'll tighten it here. Same goes for this one. The smaller one that goes to the block, we'll use the longer line with the mender and a straight 6 AM. Hose clamp in place, slide it in, take some force, and ready. So this one will go like this. Perfect. Make sure it's clamped good, and we'll proceed to install it. Okay, so we have the water pump. We have the water pump, the auxiliary one, and then we'll have the one that we did. So this one goes on this side of the water pump. You just clip it on. We'll make sure you don't run into any cables. And then we pull the one you didn't take out. It's gonna be here. And then you'll align the water pump again in place, the bracket, and we should be good to put the bracket back in. So we're not going over all the lines, so we put the one to the water pump, the mender, into this T. This T on the bottom goes to the return side of the front turbo, the one on the block side, and then this hose goes to the return side of the rear turbo. Then the feed of the rear turbo is a 45 6 AM that goes to another 45 6 AM that goes to this T. This T on the bottom goes to a 6 AM straight to a 90-degree 6 AM that goes into the front turbo, and then this 6 AM straight to hose mender that goes to the engine block side of the water pump. So that's the coolant lines on the kit. So what we did here, we put the first downpipe, which is the front. We have to make sure there's enough room to get to the V-band clamp bolt, and we did. So we got that one in, and that one's pretty much pre-aligned itself to the exhaust, so it doesn't really have much procedure to do. But then the rear downpipe, it flexes a lot. So what we did is we have a crossover pipe. We put it in place, match the downpipe, and then I have someone out there that's tightening the V-band clamp on the turbo. So it's fixed in here, it fits the crossover pipe, and then it tightens up top. So the way I like to approach the first V-band, the front turbo V-band, is I go through the axle and subframe with a swivel and the 13 mil to get into the V-band clamp and the ratchet. So that way it's easier, you don't have to go through the back. So to the front, and you align the V-band on this side, makes it super easy. So we can see front downpipe is in, and then the rear downpipe is also in. Tighten the V-band clamps, and we're pretty much done on the hardware side. We're gonna put the coolant tank back in and air filters, and it's pretty much done.